Sports Radio.
Here comes the siren. I want to go higher. Oh, my goodness. Will defend. Oh! LeBron James with no regard for human life.
Pass is intercepted at the goal line by Malcolm Butler. Unreal. Oh, baby, for sure.
Cabin Sports Radio starts now.
Cabin Sports Radio on the Cabin Radio airwaves, brought to you by Sport North, moving sport forward. Lecter and Unbreakable, Mike Gibbons joining you for another week of sports chat. Mike, even though we're in different studios, I feel like I can just feel you headbanging along with that intro still. Tell me it's not true.
Oh, no, totally. And if it ever gets to a point where I'm not headbanging, maybe it's time for me to step aside, but it always gets me just a little extra fired up, and I hope it does for other people too. Really, really well produced. I tip my hat to you. It always gets me ready to go.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, there's nothing that quite gets you ready for an hour of sports chat like thundering drums. A little bit of distortion in the guitar there, and some random Bob Cole sound clips in there. So hopefully that works for you as well. Welcome to Cabin Sports Radio. We are going to cover what we can, as we have for the past month or so, because, of course, there hasn't been a whole lot of active sports to talk about. But one exciting thing is that will change very soon, arguably with one of the least exciting sports out there. But we will get to that. Let's take a look back at the week that was with the big sports headlines and CSR news. Mike, you know what? Just before we get to that, happy 30th birthday earlier this week. Welcome to the 30 Club, big guy.
Wow, thank you so much. It was, you know what? It was a really fun day. It coincided with the same day that our self-isolation was up, which was nice. So we were able to get some fresh air, step out of the house a little bit, and then have company over in a very respectful and safe manner. Of course, no one coming inside, all hanging out outside, all staying 6 feet apart. So some close friends, yourself included, able to come by. So that made it pretty cool. It was definitely one for the record books, one that I won't forget. One, that it's a milestone. Two, just the really unusual circumstances. But all in all, it was a really fun day.
Awesome.
Before I hopped into the CSR headlines, another thing I wanted to just point to is so much of what we do in radio is theater of the mind. And we were just talking briefly about the package right up the top for the intro. So much, I think I can actually visualize every single, you got the Bob Cole featured in there. You've got the LeBron James dunking on someone. Malcolm Butler interception right at the 1 yard line. When they made the pass instead of the run play. So kudos once again.
Oh, thank you.
But here, let's hop in to our headlines. You mentioned the return to sports, which we're hoping to see late next week for one of the less exciting sports, I guess you could say, but we'll get towards that to the bottom of our package here.
It's all subjective.
Let's start off with the NHL. And the National Hockey League and its Players Association are hopeful small group activities can resume at league facilities by mid to late May. The update was confirmed in a joint press release issued late last week. A transition to this phase can only happen if conditions continue to trend favorably and regional medical experts and authorities are in agreement. Play has been suspended since March 12th due to COVID-19.
I saw Prime Minister Justin Trudeau just wasting no time throwing a wrench into the possible plans, saying that anyone, of course, crossing the border into Canada would be subject to a quarantine or a 14-day self-isolation. I think we pretty much kind of could have assumed that as of right now, things being the way they are, that would be the case. But nice to see no gray area there. You just, nope, this is the way it is. And it's like, okay, fair. That is something that will obviously have to be navigated before any return to action.
Yeah, and we'll need all parties in favor. I think one of the things, really from the players' union standpoint, and this goes for the NBA as well, I really have a hard time seeing a lot of players being on board, especially if they do go ahead with a plan to have hub cities, which we talked about last week, and we'll get into a little bit more today as well. But if they do move forward to have games in centralized locations, maybe have all divisions playing in one city, and vice versa for the other three divisions. But of course, one issue that arises with that is you're staying in that locale for an extended period of time. So
yes.
Obviously completely detached from your family. And I think that's one of the reasons why at least some of the players and maybe even some clubs as a whole aren't really in favor of this right now. But I mean, everyone, regardless of what field of work you're in right now, you're kind of at the mercy of all the medical experts right now. And then, of course, you need the buy-in from the regional authorities as well, whether they're state or provincial, federal, or an individual municipality. You need to have everyone on board.
Right. So,
yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it rolls out and what they decide in terms of hub cities and how they can progress with that. But yeah, I think that would kind of be the one issue for me that would stand out as players not really wanting to be spending weeks at a time, months even, away from their families. That might be a pretty hard sell.
Yeah, and I don't know if you saw this, but the following, I think actually maybe it was the day after we did last week's show. I think it was maybe on Tuesday. Matthew Deneau of the Montreal Canadiens said in an interview basically exactly that, and kind of framed it as like, I'm just going to say what most of the players in the league are thinking, especially the players with young children or wives or any, like close family and particularly young family that, they're not too interested in staying apart from for, like you say, up to 4.5 or 5 months or whatever it's going to be. He basically said exactly that. Like, I personally don't want to do that. And I can tell you right now, you don't even have to throw out a poll or anything like that. I can tell you right now that a lot of other players in the league don't want to do that either. So, yeah, it's tough because, I mean, you get to this point where the ownership and the teams, like the franchises themselves, and as well as Gary Bettman and the Players Association, still are kind of on the same page with what they can do, like possible scenarios for a return to play. But then, of course, there's the human side that you have to think of too. And Matthew Deneau just basically saying, just removing any questions about this, a lot of players are not going to be down. Yeah,
and that's, I guess you could say, one silver lining of this whole pandemic is the increased family time now. For a lot of people, whether it's virtual or you're in your house more with your family members, because there's not a whole lot to do outside of that, house type situation.
Yeah.
Not sports going on right now. A lot of people working from home, can't go to public events, concerts, sports, really nothing. So a lot more of that going on. I'm going a little bit off script here. I don't know if you saw that Jumbo Joe posted a video. I believe it was with him and his daughter.
Yes.
And the beard is no more.
The beard is gone. I did see that. Yeah.
Is no more. It was almost eerie to see him without a beard, but that's what it's come to. But it looked like he was enjoying a little more family time himself. Sort of sticking to that realm. The Edmonton Oilers and Vancouver Canucks are among the NHL teams who have submitted bids to host games if the season resumes. It's believed that up to 14 clubs submitted similar applications, and the league is currently sifting through them. Potential hub cities started submitting proposals after the NHL provided them with a list of detailed criteria needed in order to host games.
Yeah, and that in last week's episode of Cabin Sports Radio, we talked a little bit about the Frank Saravalli article that kind of explored some of the more likely places that may be destinations for these centralized hub cities. Columbus was one of them. Edmonton was definitely one of them. Toronto was just, I think more of a default than anything, but that's definitely one of them. And there was a few others that I think Pittsburgh might have been one of them as well. And Dallas.
I think we said Raleigh last week, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So I imagine those ones are very much part of these 14 clubs. I'm assuming there's probably at least a few that you can just kind of just right out of the gate, just knock off that list as like, well, here's pretty obvious reasons why this is going to work. I have no idea what those clubs would be, other than if Winnipeg had the gumption to submit an application, because there is an article, I don't know, like maybe a month ago now, that was like, basically, sorry Jets fans, but if this is the route it goes, don't expect to see Winnipeg on this list. Don't expect to see Calgary, because Calgary is basically the epicenter for, as far as Alberta, for COVID-19 positive cases goes. And Montreal also not a very likely candidate as far as Canadian franchises go.
Yeah, numbers in Quebec not as positive as they are in other jurisdictions. We're not really surprised to see Vancouver there, just given that British Columbia seemed to have been flattening the curve a lot faster than other jurisdictions in Canada had anyways. And I remember touching on Edmonton last week. It just made more sense than their provincial rival, Calgary, where, the numbers aren't quite as good as they could be right now, just not quite flattening the curve yet. But if you're looking for a silver lining, it seems anyways like there's some optimism that this is something that the league could move towards. I believe we spoke about this last week in terms of the NBA, in areas where measures and restrictions are being lifted, I think by as early as May 8th, which would be Wednesday. Nope, Friday. Clubs would be able to start having small groups of players return to their facilities to do some contactless drills, really probably at this point, maybe lifting some weights and shooting a basketball, really. But positive, and it looks like the NHL could be the next league to sort of trend in that direction, with the earlier announcement, meaning that they could resume some of those smaller group-type activities. They seem more eager, it feels like to me anyways, from some of the reports coming out, of actually being able to resume a season. Mm-hmm. It's hard to envision anything going on with spectators at this point, but like they feel maybe more prepared than the NBA per se to really resume this season, as opposed to just jumping ahead to the next season and considering this one a wash. But I mean, we'll see. They're still going to be at the mercy of the health and local experts. Yeah. But it seems, anyways, like they're prepared to start pushing in that direction.
It does feel like there's been a bit more of like a desperation, an air of desperation coming from the NHL and Gary Bettman in terms of just finding ways, leaving no stone unturned to get this season finished than it does the NBA, doesn't it? And I don't know if that's, if it has something to do with the fact that the NBA was hit a little harder personally as far as players who tested positive for COVID-19. I think as far as the NHL went, there was only those couple positive cases in the Ottawa Senators franchise, if I'm not mistaken. And the NBA had upwards of like 10, like more than 10, I think, something like that. I can't remember. I don't remember seeing like what a final count was, if there was one. But I mean, that could have something to do with it. But yeah, it definitely does seem like the NHL has been a lot more urgent with making plans to try to finish off this season, doesn't it?
It definitely does. I wonder if it's a matter. Obviously, everyone's staring at lost revenues right now, but it's going to hit some people a lot harder than others. It was even before the coronavirus pandemic. One thing that the NBA was pretty anxious about was their diplomatic relations with China. And that all stemmed from Daryl Morey, the general manager of the Houston Rockets, making some tweets in support of the movement that was going on in, I believe, Taiwan, which rubbed Chinese officials the wrong way. And there were some estimates that the league would lose a lot in one, viewership, but two, revenues coming in due to deteriorating diplomatic relations with the Chinese market. So that was kind of one thing they were already struggling with. And then, of course, this pandemic comes along, and there were some internal reports shortly after the pandemic forced the suspension of play that, beyond a certain period of time, they wouldn't be able to pay players. So it's an anxious time. Everyone's staring at lost revenues right now. But I would agree with you. It feels like, of those two leagues anyways, and I think we reference those two the most because they were in the middle of play.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, NFL off season, and then MLB hadn't even got off the ground yet. So everyone's going to be kind of looking at these two because, how do we salvage a season? Do we salvage a season?
Yeah.
But yes, of the two, I would agree. It seems like the NHL is much more, and I would even use the word desperate too, feels like they're more desperate anyways to really salvage this season. They want to award a Stanley Cup winner. They want to move ahead with the draft. And it just seems more so than their basketball counterparts. So who knows? It could be maybe they're a much more bleak financial outlook. I'm not quite sure. Their salary cap is significantly lower than the NBA's, and they probably don't have the same international revenues coming in just from television deals. So maybe that's why. On the notes of draft, as the NHL pushes for a return to action as early as next month, some clubs are fighting a proposal to hold the draft in June. Some reports suggest the league still plans on holding the 2020 draft next month, and many general managers are operating under that assumption. But others feel it's not fair to hold one with the season still technically underway and lottery odds still very much in the air.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one because, obviously traditionally the draft order is determined mostly by where the final regular season standings are. And then of course, you have the draft lottery. The teams that finish lowest have the best odds of getting those top draft picks. And then the odds get worse as the team standings get better, rather. So, I really don't know how you plan on doing the draft unless you just make it a totally unprecedented thing where, you just give everyone the same odds, same amount of balls, and just have like a free-for-all raffle. Like, I don't really know, how else you can do it at this point.
Yeah, and if ever there was a time for, governing bodies to look at their bylaws or their rules or the way things have been done in years past, this is the time to shake it up. So it feels like I agree that it almost has to be held at a different time. It just doesn't feel the same. We were touching on Roger Goodell in the NHL draft during last week's show, and they're on their off season, so they really, other than making it a virtual experience, didn't have to change too much, and they were lucky in that regard. But it would feel bizarre in the midst of suspended play with, rumors abound that we can resume play, hopefully sometime next month, or at least get players back on the ice sometime next month in their full squads. It does feel weird to be even talking about the next entry draft. We don't have a final season to look at. We know that there probably won't be a whole lot of shuffling, at least at the very, very bottom. But, teams may feel they have different needs based on, how the remaining 20 games or so would have played out. And do they finish them or do they go right into playoffs? There's still so much in the air. So you would think maybe pushing back the draft would be something they'd at least investigate.
Here's a hilarious scenario for you, Mike. The NHL decides to push ahead with the draft in June. They say, no, we're not going to wait. We're just going to do this. Let's change it up. Let's have one lottery ball for each team in there. Just see what happens. Edmonton Oilers, first overall pick.
Yeah. That's right. I can see it. Well, that'd be their fifth first overall pick in the last
like 7 years or something like that.
So.
Yeah. You know,
Yeah.
the only team, the only club that I would feel bad for, if this is the scenario, if they decide to just free for all, everyone has a chance for that first overall pick. The only team I would feel bad for is the Detroit Red Wings, because they
Yes.
they waited so long to have this opportunity again. They've suffered through a few really bad seasons after being, the powerhouse of the last 2+ decades. They finally, returned to the bottom of the tank. They've waited their turn to finally get a high draft pick again. And imagine if they end up, 29th pick overall.
After putting together one of the worst seasons in the modern era.
Yeah.
I think by the time play stopped, there are some at 39 points or something like that with 20 games to go.
God.
It wasn't looking really good. Sort of unrelated. I don't know if you saw that the Maple Leafs signed, I believe it was the KHL's leading defensive scorer.
I did see
today,
that.
because
Yeah.
That's exactly what the Maple Leafs need. Is another high-scoring defenseman.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Lecter, this is the All Hockey Show. We're gonna move on to our next topic,
That's
which
right.
is also hockey related, and something I think you'll get a kick out of. Music star Justin Bieber's next venture might be owning an NHL team. In his latest 31 Thoughts column for Sportsnet, NHL insider Elliot Friedman revealed that the Biebs and his father had expressed an interest in purchasing the Ottawa Senators within the past year. The club is currently valued at $435 million and is owned outright by Eugene Melnyk.
So I wonder, is it actually valued at $435 million, or is it valued at $435 million by Eugene Melnyk? Because I feel like those could be two very different things. But this is a pretty interesting one. I'm not going to say that it particularly excites me. It's certainly a headline because Justin Bieber is always a headline. We know that he is buddies with Auston Matthews and is a longtime Toronto Maple Leafs fan. So if I'm a diehard Ottawa Senators fan, there's probably like a little part of me, especially the part of me that maybe has had paranoia instilled by the team owner, Eugene Melnyk. That kind of Melnyk, that particular brand of paranoia where you think that like other teams are trying to assassinate Erik Karlsson back in the day, that sort of thing. There's probably a part of me, if I'm a diehard Sens fan, where I'm like, is he going to buy our team just to tank it? Now, obviously, that is not what he's going to do, because nobody sinks a bunch of money into a struggling franchise to completely bomb it. I don't know why you would ever do that. I'm sure Justin Bieber, say what you want about the guy, but I'm sure he's a little bit smarter with his money than that. I'm sure he's got plenty of other things and bad investments he could make if he so chose, and this would not be it. But it is really interesting, and obviously, it's the kind of thing where if you're Justin Bieber, you're a lifelong Toronto Maple Leafs fan. Maybe you had the dream of one day owning the Toronto Maple Leafs. That's just not realistic, right? You're not going to buy the Toronto Maple Leafs at this point. That'd be like someone, a born and raised New York Rangers fan, in Brooklyn, be like, one day I'm going to own the New York Rangers. Like, just pump the brakes a little bit, and maybe look a little further east to a club that, well, let's be honest, has struggled in more ways than one for the last few years.
I think the reason this is there's a number of reasons why this is pretty interesting. Number one, and I always enjoy when Forbes comes out with their evaluations of franchises, and typically the Ottawa Senators are in the bottom 10 for their valuation. As far as NHL teams are concerned. So I think it was them that came out with the $435 million, but you're right. Maybe it's Eugene just arbitrarily thrown a number out to it. And a quick little Google search of the Beavs, and he's only worth $285 million. So he would have to be looking at some type of part ownership. He'd have to get some other partners to invest. Eugene right now owning it outright. I think he's worth over $1 billion.
Right.
But it is kind of interesting just because the ownership of this team has always sort of been in the air a little bit. There's always been rumors, at least in the past 5 years or so, that Melnyk was looking to trade the club. There's still that uncertainty over if they're going to get relocated to the downtown core. LeBreton Flats was always the area they had identified for moving a potential arena for the Senators. So that's why it is a little bit interesting, is that there is some room there for these conspiracy theorists to sort of work their magic. But yeah, some other, and then this all came up during Elliot Friedman's 31 Thoughts. I believe it was a conversation he was having with a mutual friend between him and Jordan Binnington. And the discussion sort of started with the one-on-one challenge that Bieber had issued, or I think Binnington had issued to Bieber, and then it sort of steamrolled from there. So some food for thought anyway, some light entertainment. Another note I saw was that someone could more so envision him in the role of Drake to the Raptors.
Yes,
and
team
Bieber
ambassador
could be
sort of
that
thing.
to his childhood team of the Toronto Maple Leafs. But who knows? Maybe there's some truth to these Senators rumors.
I mean, I think you could already potentially argue that he has done that, and not in an official role or anything, but he has been very closely associated with the Toronto Maple Leafs. There's no secret that he's buddies with Austin Matthews, who is obviously the Toronto Maple Leafs big star. So he's kind of there already. He's done some hockey videos. But I mean, maybe one option if he is serious, obviously, like you just pointed out, his net worth would not really allow him to. And I mean, I don't know how that sort of thing works, but his net worth is about little over half of what the Ottawa Senators franchise is supposedly valued at. So maybe what is one of the trends in pop music is a collaboration. So maybe you have an ownership group of Justin Bieber featuring Sean Kingston, Usher, and Skrillex.
Yeah.
Yeah, who knows?
Usher was the one who discovered him.
There you
or
go.
Maybe he brings in Drizzy.
Maybe
Drake. And the Beavs go on to own the Ottawa Senators. Who knows?
Drake says, who are the Ottawa Senators?
Yeah. Well, correct me if I'm wrong. The Beavs is retired, isn't he?
Oh, is he?
I thought he said years ago he was retired from the game. But I don't know. Now I don't know if that just means his own albums, his own collabs, or maybe just an extended leave of absence. Who knows? I'm sure he gets back into the game somehow, and he has been collaborating here and there. But in terms of an individual album, we're talking quite a while now. So
yeah,
maybe this forces him to take another look at the trajectory of his career. Maybe he comes out of retirement, amasses some more funds, and buys a really bad hockey team.
Well,
who knows?
I'm sure it is exhausting being a 26-year-old multimillionaire, but yeah, is what it is.
Life is hard. All right, we're gonna transition to our favorite sport, Lecter, golf, where Rory McIlroy will lead the sport's return after a 2-month hiatus in a televised charity match in Florida next week. The world number one will play with Dustin Johnson against Ricky Fowler and Matthew Wolff in a $4 million skins game on May 17th in support of COVID-19 charities. With the backing of the PGA Tour, this will mark the first tentative step towards play resuming since the coronavirus lockdown.
And that's pretty exciting stuff, I got to say. I had a little...
It's good news.
Yeah, exactly. It's very positive news. I had a little go at golf off the top of the show. It is not the least exciting sport. It's just a little slow moving. That's all. But this is very exciting news, obviously. And I mean, we've heard about up here at home in other provinces, BC, there are golf clubs that are opening up. That I could see, and we've talked about this a bit here on the morning show when, just talking about things and how things are kind of returning back to normal as we do start to flatten the curve nationwide of COVID-19. And one of the things when we heard that golf clubs were starting to open up, there was a little bit of hesitation from some, and I can't help but think like, yeah, that seems like a given. Like that seems like the easiest one to have physical distancing. You know, if you decide that is still a necessary thing, it's all outdoors. You know, so there's no or less worries there. The only players or the only ones touching the golf balls are the golfers themselves and like perhaps the caddies. And I mean, maybe in this sort of thing, maybe it's a very simple adjustment, I would think, to just not have a caddy. Like, you know, these guys all know, they know the courses, they know the distances. Yeah, it's nice to have a second opinion with the caddy there, obviously, but that is something where you could make supposedly a very simple adjustment if you want to make things even a little bit safer yet.
Yeah, and I think I'll walk back some of my comments too. Golf didn't deserve that. We've even gone out for a couple rounds here. We're actually long overdue, by the way.
We are long overdue. Yeah,
and it is a lot of fun, even on our sand course here. It is a lot of fun to get a group of guys out, a group of girls out, and hit the links. And yes, if we're talking about all the sports and us eventually moving in the direction of resuming play, I agree. It sounds like one of the more safer options for sure. You could do away with the caddy for a couple rounds. It's all outdoors. You're separated from your opponent for an extended period of the time, anyways. So, and obviously this is all going to be quote unquote behind closed doors. There wouldn't be any spectators, any fans in the gallery. So. It is something that I think if they really do it right, they could move on pretty safely. So the first step, hopefully, towards play being able to resume. I think, like hockey, it's been since March 12th that all play has been suspended. So a 2-month hiatus. It'll be nice to see it. And I do like watching golf. You know, it's a nice weekend thing. I like it in the summer, especially on Sundays. Mm-hmm. It's a relaxing thing to throw on in the background. Yeah, kind of miss the days of Tiger in his red shirt on Sundays. You knew that he was going to come out and get the W. Yeah. But there's still tons of great names in the game, and four of them in McIlroy, Johnson, Fowler, and Wolff will be featured in this game. So no, it's a good step for the tour. And a good step for sports, hopefully resuming soon. Yeah,
it's almost akin to baseball in that way, where it's something you can have on in the background, and you can. Totally. It's one of the few sports left where I think you can legitimately follow along just by listening to it. You don't even have to be watching, but you can listen, and the sound effects, like the audio in a golf game. Match similar to a baseball game. The audio is so, I don't know, there's just something about it where, yeah, you don't even really need to be watching, and the audio will just instruct you when something exciting is happening. And it's not the same in football. It's not the same in hockey. It's not the same even in basketball. Like, there's just something about those two sports because, and I think it is something to do with the fact that they are a bit more slow moving. The sound bites are very indicative of when it is time to pay attention. But it is, yeah, a nice kind of relaxing thing to have on in the background. And it's really cool that they're doing this, obviously raising money for charity, I read up to $3 million going to the American Nurses Foundation, and I think some proceeds being divided among some other charities too. So good on them, and just, very exciting that we will have a fundraiser that doesn't involve Zoom in any way, shape, or form.
That's right. I think there's also, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's a UFC match this weekend as well.
Yeah, UFC has been definitely one of the most, no pun intended, but one of the most aggressive organizations in terms of trying to keep things as normal as possible. There were some outrageous story headlines that came out about Dana White possibly buying a private island to to continue to hold UFC events. Yeah, I don't think that's happened. I don't even know if that was actually necessarily true. But the UFC has basically, as far as leaving no stone unturned to try and keep things as on schedule and on track as possible. They have definitely been the most aggressive in that, right? So no surprise to hear that the UFC is coming back sooner than later. I mean, that's another one where you can certainly easily enough control that. You do temperature checks with the fighters. Yep. You have them perhaps self-isolating. Obviously, you can still train while you're self-isolating in the weeks leading up to a fight. And then same thing, you just don't do it in front of a live crowd. Obviously, it takes some of that intense atmosphere away, but you can still very easily and achievably do this in a safe setting.
Yeah, you're only going to have two opponents in the ring at a given time. Obviously, the refs there as well.
Yeah.
Not able to physically distance appropriately when your goal is to punch someone else in the head. But you can control how many people are in the ring, and I'm sure all of them are going to be tested before they even step foot in. And then what are there, 5 judges? You can spread them out. Really, that's and then other than the camera crew, those are the only folks you would need in the building. Probably some health and safety reps too, in case someone gets really banged up. But you can control those figures a lot safely in a safer manner than you can in other sports. But Lecter, this is. In the age of COVID-19, we're going to hear lots of, you alluded to the private island, we're going to hear all sorts of outlandish allegations and rumors. There may be truth to some of them, but I imagine behind closed doors there are a lot of really weird and crazy conversations going on right now, and that's probably across all sports. So in some areas, when there's smoke, there's fire. Others are probably just totally fabricated and outlandish, but these conversations are happening, and some will pan out and some won't.
You know what, Mike? But it's exactly those kind of outlandish conversations that we need to keep material coming for a sports show.
That's right.
In the wake of no sports. So good on them.
It's hard, man.
That's right. Keep coming up with your wacky schemes, and we will keep talking about them. All right, we are going to take a break. We'll be right back with more on Cabin Sports Radio.
The CSR Podcast.
Cabin Sports Radio, brought to you by Sport North. They are moving sport forward. I took a late, probably a little bit late to the party, look at the Sport North website recently, and they were selling their Arctic Winter Games gear. Of course, the Arctic Winter Games, which never happened, which makes them kind of special in that way. But as of mid-April, they started selling their Arctic Winter Games gear. They got jackets, zip-up hoodies, pants, and some other swag for sale. So if you're interested in owning a piece of history because, well, it was never actually worn by the athletes, you can contact Whitney at Sport North at wweaver, WWEAVER, at sportnorth.com. And they can take your order and you can gear up with some Arctic Winter Games swag. So thank you to Sport North for continuing to sponsor Cabin Sports Radio, and check them out at sportnorth.com. All right, Mike, so you made a joke earlier in the show that this is the all hockey show. We have talked mostly about the NHL and its pause amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Their plans to possibly return, they've put together a possible scenario, of course, with Central Hub. There's been talks of, several, maybe 4, maybe a few more Central Hub locations for teams to play. Nothing squared away yet, but we did mention how it is a little bit strange how, in comparison, how seemingly quiet the NBA has been with regards to talking about scenarios about continuing the 2019-2020 season. They stopped. They went on hiatus the exact same day. And it's just been a little bit strange at times how little we have heard from the NBA. We're hearing a little bit today, not so much with anything conclusive. You mentioned about teams being allowed to return to some training facilities and do some light training, that sort of thing. But we haven't heard a lot about the actual return to the season and playing out the rest of the regular season and playoffs. However, there is an article on TSN today that Adam Silver and the owners have apparently had favorable talks about what to do past this season. For some reason, and I mean, I'm sure there is a lot of talk about this season and what to do, maybe just being a bit tight-lipped about it with regards to the media. But there is talk about what to do with next season, and that being that if this season should continue at some point and finish perhaps in late summer, like August, they're talking about pushing back the 2021 season until December. Michael, your thoughts?
It is curious, and we alluded to it earlier, that it seems maybe there aren't people leaking quite as much, but it seems like they've been a little more tight-lipped than the National Hockey League. The NBA, of course, was the first league to come out and immediately postpone play for it's originally indefinitely. We'll see how long it drags out now. But that was immediately after the positive diagnosis of COVID-19 for Rudy Gobert, and then Donovan Mitchell, and then there were a handful, probably a dozen other NBA players who at least had their diagnoses made public. But yeah, they have been quite quiet, and it looks now like they're almost focusing more on next season. Some reports coming out suggesting that agents and team executives are more in favor of canceling the rest of this year and then turning their gaze towards next year. And that prompted a response from LeBron James saying that he's not hearing that at all. Players definitely don't want that. But they are human too. So one obvious concern, as we pointed to with NHL players earlier, it would involve quarantine. So players and teams would be away from their families for a long period of time. And a lot of people have already publicly said that they would not be in favor of that. So not really surprising that someone like LeBron, who's, of course, in the twilight of his career and chasing the ghost of Michael Jordan, if you will, and his 6 rings. We know that LeBron has 3, probably had what might be his last best shot at a title with the Lakers, who were first in the West and poised to make a deep playoff run this year. So, the teams that are built to win now, yeah, they're pretty upset that this season can't continue right now. Other teams may not have that immediate concern. But compared to the NHL anyways, I think the NBA has been fairly quiet in terms of how they can progress with this season. And who knows, that may be because they're considering this kind of a wash already and already maybe turning their gaze to next year.
I'd be interested to hear what the thoughts are from the players as well, but also from the ownership and executives of the Toronto Raptors, because obviously them being the only Canadian franchise, they pose a bit of a unique situation to the rest of the NBA. Should the league return to action, of course, anyone coming, if it did return in a fuller capacity, not going the NHL route of having centralized hub locations, but, potentially, and I don't even know if this is realistic to talk about it this way, because obviously travel is severely restricted. So I don't know if it's at all realistic to say, yeah, maybe they could go back to normal, to a time or a scenario where teams are able to travel freely to and from games, across the border with the Toronto Raptors. But part of me would think that they're almost kind of just sitting idly by and thinking, maybe we just let the league kind of figure out what they want to do with this one. And then obviously they will have to factor that and the Toronto Raptors into the plans, and then just kind of go from there, because there's got to be almost like a helplessness feeling from the Toronto Raptors point of view with regards to the season possibly resuming.
Yeah, a whole other bunch of considerations. I don't think the Canadian-American border will be opening up anytime soon. A lot of airlines aren't even offering international flights. They don't expect, at least until maybe even the end of this year. So we have no idea how long this will drag out. We're at the mercy of the virus itself, and the people who know it a lot better than us will be the ones who make the decision. It remains to be seen. But yeah, like you said, compared to some other franchises, they have a lot more to think about, I would think. So they'll probably take the lead of the National Basketball Association. And again, I don't know if I expect that anytime soon.
Yeah.
Just compared to their NHL counterparts, it's surprising how very little we've heard from the NBA and its head office about how play could resume. They were, of course, ahead of everyone in terms of postponing play.
Mm-hmm.
But and to go back to some of those outlandish stories we've heard, Disneyland has been thrown around as a possible play site for play to resume. Hearing some, I guess there are facilities down there. I'm not sure. I've heard that one, or either that or Disney World, one of the two. Vegas has been thrown around, and then for even some of the franchises sort of on the bubble in terms of just getting by from a financial standpoint. Maybe some teams even go up for sale when this is all said and done. And I think it was Shaq who alluded to maybe an NBA franchise moving over to Vegas permanently. So there's lots of things flying around right now. People trying to see if they'll stick. Who knows when all is said and done what's actually going to happen and what won't. But it might be soon. It might not be. We do know that in areas where some restrictions are being lifted, players can resume very light workouts, but that is very far from play being able to resume.
Yeah.
So we'll just have to wait and see.
They might just consider moving the whole shebang to Universal or like Warner Brothers Studios, and then LeBron can kill two birds with one stone, finish off the NBA season, and get that new Space Jam movie underway.
Which has not been delayed, apparently. So we're still looking at a release sometime next summer. So we got that to look forward to.
Beautiful. Okay, so obviously a lot remains to be seen with what does get figured out with the rest of the NBA season and playoffs. However, there is, regardless of the tight-lippedness of the NBA, there has been something in the sports world that has got everyone talking, and it has to do with the NBA, The Last Dance docuseries. Mike, I haven't started watching it yet, but you have delved in, I understand.
I am up to episode 4, so 2, and that's so they're releasing 2 at a time. They started 2 weeks ago, so I think they drop on Netflix in Canada every Monday. And ESPN has the broadcast rights to the Sunday before, I believe. So there'll be 10 episodes altogether, and this is footage they've been sitting on since the last run with the second three-peat for the Chicago Bulls in 97, 98.
Yeah.
Their earlier three-peat, of course, coming from 91 to 93. And they've just been sitting on this footage for 20 years. So nice to see it finally come out now. There's a lot of untold stories or a lot of memories coming back for people, I'm sure, from the late 80s Celtics teams. We learn a little bit about some of them. And then, of course, you got the bad boy Detroit Pistons in the late 80s. So it's shedding a light on a lot of those basketball rivalries. A lot of individual features when you've got characters like Phil Jackson, Michael Jordan, Dennis Rodman, and then you can throw in Steve Kerr, Scottie Pippen. There's no shortage of talent, but no shortage of character as well. So this puts it all in the spotlight for people.
And how are you
Probably
liking
bring
it so
back a lot of
far?
memories for some people, but for folks like myself and maybe our generation a little bit more, I think a newfound respect and appreciation for those championship runs and Michael Jordan, who is considered by most to be the GOAT.
Yeah, so you're enjoying it, eh?
Very good. Very, very good.
Yeah.
Without, I don't want to get into spoilers too much, but, a lot of them introduce Jordan and his backstory a bit more. Same with his teammates, Pippen and Rodman. I think it was the last episode. Rodman just straight up said, "You know what? I'm going on vacation." So mid-season, he needed to take off and spend a couple days in Vegas. But it was with the understanding that it would only be for a couple days. He, of course, broke that curfew, stayed a bit longer. So Michael Jordan had to go down there and pick him up. But can you imagine how that would fly in today's NBA or
God.
NHL? You know what, Coach? I need a break.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't know if it would be received quite as favorably, but
yeah. Well, I mean, you don't have characters
it,
like that anymore. You don't have Dennis Rodmans out there. Like the league just it doesn't allow for it, and that's I think part of what makes him so unique and such a legend. On top of the fact that he's arguably the greatest defensive player in NBA history.
Yeah,
you got that
rebounder. Yeah,
yeah, you got piled on the fact that he was one of the. Probably the biggest character in sports history, you had to say. And
no doubt.
It's there's just no shortage of material and stories, I'm sure, there with the worm in the mix. All right, so I am yet to get into that one, but that will be happening very, very soon. I've heard nothing but the most positive reviews, so can't wait to check out The Last Dance.
The Cabin Sports Radio Podcast, brought to you by Sport North, moving sport forward.
Cabin Sports Radio, yes, indeed, brought to you by Sport North, moving sport forward. Big thanks to Unbreakable Mike Gibbons once again for joining me for another episode of Cabin Sports Radio, and thank you once again for tuning in and listening. One last thing to go. You may have heard news out of the NFL. We mentioned a little bit earlier on in the show that things are starting to affect them as we continue to negotiate and evaluate where we are at with this pandemic and what can be safely achieved and what can go ahead to schedule. There have been a few changes made to their regular season as it's become a tradition the past decade or so that the NFL has international regular season games. There were, I believe, 4 games scheduled to happen in London in 2 different facilities. Those are no longer happening. Those are gone. And the game that was scheduled in Mexico City as well is canceled. So starting to affect the NFL. We will see where it goes from here as we continue to all wait and see what happens. But much like the rest of us, the NFL is trying to keep things as normal as possible. Teams still meeting regularly over Zoom. And the Seattle Seahawks got Zoom bombed by none other than Will Ferrell. Have a great week. Talk to you next week on Cabin Sports Radio.
Shoddy, just want to let you know I came here to catch some balls, and that's what I hope to do. In fact, I've been, what I did mostly for Carolina is I drew up all my own plays, so I'm going to be adding a lot to the playbook. This one I just drew up, it's called 90 Go Flywheel Kanye Starburst. So we're going to be.
I like it, Greg. I like it.
Okay, good. So let's get that into the playbook. Remember, no max protection. Don't stick me back there for max protection.
Talk to Solari.
I will not do it. I think we got a good tight end group. Luke Wilson. The only thing I want to tell you is you got to tamp that down, okay? That's not how I handle myself, all right? I don't know what you do in the off season up there in Canada, but, cut your hair and let's play some football, all right? Coach Schneider, just want to let you know, I want to be real clear, I do not do special teams. Not ever. Not if all 52 guys are hurt. Coach, you've been real nice. We've had some great talks. I really appreciate the fact that you're going to allow me to actually do broadcasting during the real game. So I'm only going to play about 12 plays a game. And I got to get it back up into the booth. But it's an exciting opportunity for me. And look, I know what you're thinking. I'm an older guy. I'm 36. But But I've been working out. Don't worry. I mean, does this look like the body of a 36-year-old? I don't think so. In fact, my body's a temple. I know that's what you guys preach there. And I've been doing a lot of yoga and nothing else. This is a yoga body.